Thank you very much. Okay, let's get started by introducing myself because I'm fairly certain you've never heard of me. My name is Sven Decker. I'm a lead software engineer at real.digital, and we provide an e-commerce platform for now in Germany, but we're looking at expanding in the neighboring countries. So my job is basically to lead a team of UI engineers, front-end developers, back-end developers, just a big happy bundle of productive people. And I do that at Real Digital. We are a fairly large company in terms of impact because our platform is pretty strong scale for the German way. So we got quite a few visitors each month. We have quite a few customers, and most importantly, we are steadily growing at currently 300 employees and counting. Shameless sellout, we are also hiring. So if you're interested in working in Germany, just hit me up after the conference or go to real.digital. Moving right on. Because I don't want that guy to suffer alone, I need all of you people, no escaping now. Every time you see that snail, I want you to go, oh, let's try it. Perfect. Okay, let's make it easy. Everybody does it. So let's talk about devices a bit. Obviously, I'm going to be slightly biased if you didn't notice the title of the talk, so this is going to be all about mobile today. The reason for that we crunched the numbers at our shop and crunched the numbers of the internet in general. And what we noticed is that by far the most traffic is mobile, meaning that's the largest target group you have for your website. And if you don't bother optimizing for them, frankly, you don't need to bother optimizing at all. Got some numbers because, like I said, my shop is not really a sample set to talk about. But luckily, the guys at Monetate did research as well for 3,000 websites. And the result was that while mobile traffic has the highest degree of traffic compared to tablets and desktops, what they actually don't have is conversion rates. So you get a lot of people on mobile phones, but they don't buy anything from you, which if you're in e-commerce is sort of a bad thing. So what you need to do is basically think about why that is the case. There's a lot of studies going around that basically people on mobile just want to browse and discover products and don't really have any intent to purchase. But by now, the actual readers, they are unable to buy. They don't have the necessary patience, meaning they don't want to wait 30 seconds for a page to load or a crappy mobile internet. Or the interface is so unusable that they actually can't be bothered to fight their way through it to actually be able to buy anything. So Philippe from the New York Times was kind enough to do this slide for me yesterday. Basically, it's the rule of 3 seconds. So after 3 seconds of load time, half your visitors are gone. It's half your mobile people just never even entering your conversion funnel. They're just straight up bouncing and searching somewhere else. Of those, 80% will never even return to your website. So you've lost a huge chunk of potential customers right there by being crappy. Additionally, for every second you take after 3 seconds, you're going to lose an additional 7%. That's absolute 7% of conversion rate. So if you are like, let's say about you, that paints a pretty bleak picture. I went around and crawled these numbers yesterday. To be a bit fair, we are measuring page load here, which is a bad idea. Why, I'm going to tell you in a second. But what we can see here is that basically everybody is crap on mobile. That's a 3G connection. And if you're waiting 10 plus seconds for each page to load, so basically start page, search results, item detail page, add to cart, checkout, purchase, so that's like 5 minutes of your time gone just trying to purchase something on mobile. So like I said, this comparison is not quite fair because what it does is not measure the perceived speed. Again, Philippe was talking about that yesterday. Basically, what's important to the customer is that he can see something on the screen. It doesn't matter if the page load event has fired from him. It doesn't matter when the first byte was received on his phone. What he cares about is, okay, there's something happening. And to that effect, what we should be measuring is meaningful paint. Basically, when is the first paint on the screen that actually does something for me, so not the company logo in the top left, but actual content the user can work with. And more importantly, the speed index, which describes when the viewport of the device has been filled. So basically, the lower your speed index, the faster you're above the fold content has been rendered. Everything that happens after that doesn't really concern the mobile user because you're on a viewport this size anyway. So you can lazy load everything else afterwards. But the speed index is a really good measure for that. And if you take that, the world looks a whole lot better. Meaning everybody, almost everybody, is below 10 seconds. For those interested why Amazon has still such a large number, please see me after the conference. They are cheating a bit. Obviously, they're not at 20 seconds or they would be out of business. So, second lesson of today, speed is not a single-digit number, despite what the last slide was trying to tell you. It's always a distribution. Again, we talked about that yesterday. It strongly depends on your type of device, on your mobile connection. Basically, this is a speed curve measurement, which is a really great tool for performance measurement. If you haven't heard of it, give it a try. It's great. And what we can see here is basically the last month of real.digital traffic, so roughly 100K sessions. And what you can see is that we have a distinct, let's say, it's a Glock curve, Gauss curve if you want, at 4 seconds. And the average is at 6 seconds. You still have quite a number of customers who are going beyond 10. So what I like to call that is a long tail of sadness, because that's where you lose money all the time by not optimizing for the, let's say, the right third of this graph. So everything from here is lost money. That's quite a lot of traffic. Beautiful. So we have Gary over here trying to buy something, and he doesn't really have the patience to do it, so he just, I don't know, goes to his desktop and cries, or goes to a physical store, but he definitely will not buy from you over the internet. So how do you optimize for that? There's a lot of ways. As front-end developers, I'm sure you're familiar with most of them, so I'm just going to quickly go over them. For once, because you're on a limited mobile connection, you need to keep your website small in terms of size, meaning no large hero images, compress everything you can, limit the number of requests you make so you don't have to fetch the connection every time, which over 3G takes a lot of time. And of course, minify everything you send out to save further size. Now, everything works fine. What it is, however, is what I like to call reactive optimization. If you're going to take a buzzword from this talk, take this one. What I mean by this is you start with shit, and then you try to make it less shit. And that works, but it's not really the ideal way to go about it. So you have 5,000 requests because your marketing people insist on ad trackers for every single pixel on your website. I see some people crying in the audience, I've been there. Or you have lots of, let's call it historically grown CSS, so lots of files, lots of unused CSS. Luckily, Jonathan was kind enough to provide us with a way to detect that. So you start minifying it all, but you still don't need it. It's still way too much CSS or JS even. So what you actually want to do is basically start from the beginning by restricting your CSS to what's necessary. And by necessary, I mean necessary to render the above the fold content. You want to prohibit everything that blocks rendering. That means repainting, recalculating, waiting for asynchronous CSS, which is still a thing, sadly enough. And you want to do everything to optimize for the in-viewport render time, meaning the content in the viewport of the device should be there as fast as possible. Everything else that's not initially seen, the user doesn't care if it's 10 seconds or 15 seconds. So what you want to do is enable, I called it a fast by design mobile web. And luckily, to get that done, somebody was kind enough to give us a toolbox for that called AMP, or Accelerated Mobile Pages. Who here has heard of AMP? Quick show of hands again. It's actually quite a large number, I'm surprised. So yeah, let's talk about it a bit. What AMP does is basically give you a framework for enforcing a website to be fast. So at the worst case, you can think of it as a linter. If you use it properly, you can think of it more as a framework. It's been quite widely adopted for news stories, meaning if you head to Google News on your phone, in all likelihood, you're going to see a result that looks pretty much like this, where every single news story is on an AMP page, and most of the Google search results actually are as well. And there's a reason for that, because it's quite fast, to be honest, and I prepared a little bit of a demonstration because I don't have trust in the WLAN here, wireless LAN. So yeah, let's count the seconds until the page loads after I click on the search result. So basically right now I'm just browsing a bit, trying to pick an entry out that I feel is interesting, and then I'm good to go. That's it. You don't have to wait. We talked about it yesterday as well, perceived speed, everything below 1 second keeps the user on the flow. He can just continue scrolling and browsing. He doesn't even notice actually he has to load anything. There are further images further on this page, there are videos, but we are not loading them initially. We are only loading what's displayed in the viewport. And that enables us to make a really, really fast above the fold render time. So now Gary is happy. Actually, that works really good. I'm proud of you. So how does it work under the hood? The bad news, in quotation mark, is it's from Google. The good news is they open sourced it, so I think it's along the line with Kubernetes and other tools. Luckily, it's on GitHub, so I think if you're talking about vendor login, you can choose if you want to be logged in by Google or by Microsoft. In my opinion, you are doing neither because it's still open source. And basically, you can view the entire library here. Luckily, you can also contribute to it. We can see there's a bit more than 500 people actively contributing to it, and I think apart from like 10 of them, everybody is not at Google, so it's really fitting the definition of an open source framework. I'm really driving this point home because everybody I've talked to is like, okay, it's a Google thing, when do I have to pay for it? That's not going to happen with this library, I guess. So what does it actually do under the hood to bring you this sort of speed we are talking about? Basically, AMP consists of 3 parts. 2 of them are on your page, the third is not. So you have a special subset of HTML called, surprisingly, AMP HTML, a special subset of JavaScript called AMP.js. They're not really that good with names, I guess. And the AMP cache, which is basically where quite a lot of optimization happens afterwards. So AMP HTML is basically a set of custom tags for your website, meaning where we would previously use an HTML tag like image, now we are using AMP image. And what it does at render time is quite a lot of performance improvements. So you will see that I have to statically size this image, so we know exactly how large it is going to be on the viewport. We don't have to calculate it. We don't have to wait for all the CSS to be processed to know the size of this image. It's always going to be 640. That means we are really able to build up the skeleton of the page even without having the content and know how much space we need to reserve for our image. On the downside, you need to have a custom set of HTML. Everything that's HTML5 will still render, obviously, so that's basically the fallback in case AMP isn't able to work properly. But you would have to use AMP HTML to really get the maximum of speed from your website. Who here has worked with Angular, React, Vue, anything like that? Yeah, that's what I expected. Okay, so that line should be fairly familiar because what it does is actually the same. It loads the AMP runtime, which is basically the JavaScript library responsible for crawling your page, building your DOM, similar to what Angular or Vue do with the virtual shadow DOM. Basically what that means is if you're using an uncached version of the page, you should load this script at the very beginning, and everything else is optimized by that script, so you don't have to worry about further load. The script will detect the page layout and then basically take care of which resources to load first based on their position or closeness to the viewport. It works really nicely, and I think that script is fairly small as well, so it doesn't have a measurable performance impact. The most controversial part about AMP is going to be the cache, because until quite a while ago you could only cache AMP pages at Google, which of course is a bad thing. Right now there are multiple caches available. CloudFront joined the club as well, and you can do it on your own CDN as well. Basically the advantage of taking Google's cache is that they are fairly good at caching stuff because they do it on a global scale. However, you're not forced to do that. The library works really well if you don't use it, and if you want to do your own cache or your own CDN, you can do that as well. So in this case, I picked a page from yesterday. Elon Musk is trying to build a Hyperloop in Chicago, which I guess is good news. But you will notice that here in the very top of the screen there's this gray bar. The content you are viewing here is not served from your page, so it's not from the New York Times page, but it's actually still on Google, loaded from the Google cache. That makes tracking, of course, a bit difficult in advertising. Luckily, there are tools for that in the AMP toolbox as well. But you need to live with the fact that you are serving your content, not from your servers. And that's something that might take a bit of convincing for your business people to do. Usually I convince them with the numbers of speed. But in this case, it's something to at least keep in mind. The user will not be on your page that every link he clicks on this page will take him to yours. Your page will load very fast because what we are doing is, while loading the cached version, we are already opening connections to your page. We were talking briefly yesterday about prefetching and preloading. Basically, that's what AMP does as well. So if you have links on this page, like further news articles, or you might also be interested in reading, you can expect your page to load significantly faster as if you had a cold start, so to speak, from a Google search result. So there are some restrictions involved. Now let's get to the pain part. You cannot use JavaScript at all, ever, on the page except for the AMP runtime. who here feels that is a bad thing? I would have expected more, honestly. Okay, so that makes it challenging to work with a front-end framework like React, Angular, Vue, and do AMP, because you're not allowed to client-side render your stuff. You can do it server-side, but one of the key advantages of especially Angular and Vue is that you can do all the rendering, all the building up of the DOM client-side. And in this case, AMP flat out dies, because it has to know the page layout at render time. And if you're busy calculating your components, you don't know that render layout. There are workarounds for that. Again, if you're interested in those, please come talk to me afterwards. It's possible. But the second biggest restriction, especially if you're working in a legacy code base as I do, you only have 50 KB of CSS. While that sounds like a lot, it actually isn't. I've crawled through a couple of pages today. Even the FrontCona page is above that limit. And it's not really something you would consider like a gigantic website full of content. So what that means is you really have to take a good look at your CSS, bundle it smartly, bundle it by roots, only load the CSS you're actually going to use. And you are not allowed to request it externally, so it has to be not inline but internal in the page header. Because otherwise, if you were loading the page, you would have to wait while fetching the CSS. That would block rendering. We are not allowed to do that. Consequence of that, we are basically uncoupling the page layout from the page content. I talked about it briefly at the image tag. So what you are doing is basically you are able to build the entire DOM of the document. You are doing the entire layout of the page without having any of the content to build it, because all of the content is statically sized. Meaning I can build the page completely without having to wait for the image to arrive and then determining its size and then applying CSS rules to shrink it down a bit. I can just pop it in when it's ready because I have a space reserved that's exactly the size of the image. So that means you are very good at uncoupling this layout. You don't have any hidden dependencies. Your page doesn't shift when images come in. So you have a completely static layout, and you have, as a consequence of your resources are statically sized as well. So let's make a quick handy flow chart, because I took a lot of pleasure in doing this. If it can't block rendering, you can use it in AMP. That's not a problem. If it can block rendering, you're going to have a problem, because AMP is not going to run on it. You're still going to serve a page, obviously, but you will not have any of the benefits of AMP. So basically, as a fallback, AMP shuts itself down and just serves your page normally. So let's talk a bit about why we actually bother with that. I showed you a quick demonstration of the newspapers a while ago. They're loading really fast. That's nice. But in my case, my company is not in the newspaper business, but we are trying to sell stuff to people doing e-commerce. So what I have here is a shamelessly ripped presentation from the last AMP conference in Google. I included the link to the original document in the bottom left. It's bit.ly/amp-commerce. If you're interested in how AMP works in e-commerce context, that is pretty much recommended reading. But what I'm going to show you now is basically a comparison. On the left side is standard HTML. On the right side is AMP HTML. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to buy one of these items. So on the right side, we are already on the, let's call it the item detail page. On the left, we are still trying to load it. I don't know if you can see it properly, but basically, we are about halfway there, while the item detail page has already loaded. And now what I'm going to do is basically just do the normal user flow, browse the page, place it in a cart, place an order. And let's see how these compare. So I'm adding the item to cart on AMP, not even loading the image. I can't even see what I'm buying on the left side. I'm on the checkout. I'm actually placing the order. I get the order confirmation on screen before the first page even has finished loading. Now that's a bit of an extreme example, obviously, but the basic idea is the same. The user has its null point, has time to wait or actually abort the purchase because everything happens within 1 second. I didn't time it actually, but every page load in here should be well below 800 milliseconds and therefore feel pretty fluid to the user. So you're just basically tapping through. And you'll notice they are not tapping as soon as the button is there. They're taking time to scroll around a bit, make a decision, actually reach that decision. But if they have made that decision, you don't want them to wait for half a minute while the cart page loads, and then wait for another minute while the checkout page loads, and then wait for yet another minute where they wait for the order confirmation. So that's where AMP comes in. If it works blazingly fast. If it doesn't work, you are back to where you started. So basically, you're serving a normal page load. So what I'm trying to say is there's not really a downside to using AMP. If you're using it improperly, it won't hurt you. If you're doing it properly, you get times 10 the speed. So that's nice one, I hear say, but how would you actually go about implementing it? Basically, there's a couple of different approaches you can do. I'm assuming you're starting with an existing project, so basically you have, like, let's say a standard online shop, and you want to amp it up. So what you would try to do is, for instance, just give it a try. You want to prototype it, so you pick out one page at random, let's say the start page. You could say, okay, I have my normal start page version, now I'm going to do an amp version of that as well and see if it performs better. That means, of course, maintaining a second version of your start page, because you have to use the AMP HTML components in there, and you're not allowed to use JavaScript. So in all likelihood, you cannot just plug the AMP components in your existing start page, because you're using JavaScript there, add trackers, etc., etc. So you would have to do a second version of the page for testing purposes, which is, of course, a pain to maintain, but it will let you reach an informed decision and basically compare the two versions of the page with each other. One thing that I saw a lot in the internet in the last year or two, basically the people who were trying AMP versions of the page had a really, really stripped down version of the mobile page. So on the normal mobile page you had basically full content, rich images, rich text, and on the AMP page it was basically just a product picture and a link to please buy me. And obviously that's not a great mobile experience. So actually what you should aim to do is do something called a feature parity, meaning every feature you have on your mobile page you should have on your AMP page as well. Otherwise you're not comparing the two things on an equal footing. And while the results for AMP may actually still be better, you can't actually show the impact in numbers to your business people as you could when you were comparing the same thing. So while I would recommend not maintaining two versions of your page, if you do it, please do it properly and maintain feature parity across both versions. So what else could you do? You could pick out a point of your user journey and say, okay, all my users are coming in from search results straight to an item detail page. So I want to start to amp that up, so every user who comes on my page is initially served a really fast page. That's of course a good idea. I strongly recommend, if you're going into AMP, go AMP only, meaning don't try to maintain two separate versions, because if you're going along with any sort of velocity in terms of features, it will be double the overhead. And that's never a good thing, regardless of if you use AMP or not. So if you replace, let's say, your start point with AMP, your user has a really, really fast initial load, and then a slightly faster, because of preloading, prefetching, a slightly faster second load. So let's say he's arriving on the item detail page, it's instantly there below 1 second, then he adds it to cart, and instead of 10 seconds it takes 5. That's okay, but not optimal. It's a good starting point, however. Another possibility, you could try to amp up the conversion points, meaning customer browsed through your page, actually put an item in the car, is now on the checkout page, and you want the checkout page to be fast as fuck. It has to be there instantly. Ideally, you have all the payment information for your customers, so you can do something like a one-click buy. But it has to be really snappy. You want the actual conversion point. The user made the decision to buy. You want the decision to be reflected instantaneously. Don't have a loading spinner for 15 seconds processing your order or something. I've seen it. Don't do that. Actually try to give the user the feedback, hey, you bought the item, thank you, we are sending it to you. That's what they want, and that's what we should give them in order to make them feel good about buying from us. Yeah, that's the ideal implementation. If you're starting from scratch in a front-end project and you'd like to use AMP, I would recommend going with it everywhere, because it provides a nice reference framework for you to work with. It forces you to clean up your CSS or to write good CSS at the start, and basically it's a set of best practices to guide you along as you develop your project. Obviously, if you already have an existing project, that is going to be quite a lot of work. So if you can convince your people to do that, good for you. Usually that doesn't happen. So what you're usually trying to do is basically switch the page one step at a time to AMP. If you can do it all at once in a greenfield implementation, good for you, please do that. So, should I use AMP? Tough question, I'm going to play it safe here. Maybe. So I prepared a sort of handy checklist for you of when to use it. When it makes sense to use it. If you have a lot of mobile customers, obviously if you don't, you shouldn't be optimizing for mobile, or at least not to the extent we are currently. The idea is if you have a lot of mobile users, you're trying to get them to become customers, and they won't become customers if they have to wait 5 minutes to be able to buy something from you. So in that case, it makes perfect sense to try out AMP and see if that makes a difference for your page. Another indicator that AMP would work really great for you is if you have clear entry or focus points. So again, if you are like a news company and people just drop in on your news articles, that's a great page to start. Actually, that's what we see in the internet right now, because I think 2/3 of the news providers in the Western world have actually switched to AMP. So what that means is if you have a clear entry point for your user where you can feel the initial page load, really make an impact for the user perceived speed, that's a good point. Or if you have your focus point, like a conversion funnel, confirmation pages, anything really to give the user feedback, the closer that feedback is to the user action, the better the user will feel about it. Again, below 1 second is ideal. And lastly, if you have a static or at least largely static front end, that's also a good indicator because you can just swap out your standard HTML for AMP HTML, and basically you're good to go. AMP actually has support for state, similarly to basically most front-end frameworks like Vue or React. You can do state management in AMP as well, so you can have stuff like, is my user logged in, or does he have stuff on his card, or is he subscribed to newsletters? Basically anything you can think about, you can do with AMP as well. So you're not forced into the world of WordPress and blogs, so you can actually use AMP on pages where we have dynamic state as well. I think most of us do actually. Who here does have a completely stateless project, meaning no login, just information displayed? Yeah, that's what I thought, nobody. So, key takeaways for that. AMP is a really great tool to make your page fast, if you can use it. But that's no excuse to not optimize your page. I get the argument, I don't want to use anything from Google, I don't want to log myself into the Google cache or the Cloudflare cache or any other. But that's not really an excuse to not optimize for mobile users. I know I'm not really saying something new here. Mobile first has been the front-end credo for at least 5 years. But so far I've seen nothing that actually looks like people care about mobile users at all. And if you're using AMP, you are forced to care. Because you have a validation result, you can see if your page passes AMP validation. If it does, it's going to be blazingly fast. If it doesn't, it's going to load normally. So again, while AMP is a really great support to actually get you on that road to mobile performance optimization, there are plenty of other ways. You don't have to use AMP to do that. As long as you do anything to care for your mobile users, you'll get my vote. Secondly, if you are optimizing load speed, you should focus on the user perceived speed. Basically, I'm echoing what Philippe said yesterday. But what matters to the user is when the page is ready to interact with. So interactive time is a really important feature. Above the fold content rendered is a really important feature. And basically you need to drop the notion from the back-end people, I've been one myself, of, okay, I have a time to first byte of 250 milliseconds. Yeah, your user doesn't care about that. The page is still white for him. Maybe he can see a loading spinner if you're actually doing something, but it's not that he can actually interact with your content yet because there is no content. So in terms of speed, focus on what the user notices, not on what your server people notice in the monitoring logs. And last but not least, in order to actually get a happy user, what you should do is prioritize above the fold content, above everything else. So if it's not going to be visible initially, lazy load it. Just don't render it at all, don't load it, don't request it. Just make sure that you can display everything you need to fill the initial viewport. And after that, make a hard cut and load everything else asynchronously. If you can do that, you're going to have a lot of happy customers. And if you're going to have a lot of customers, you're going to be a quite happy developer. So that's basically my closing words for you. Care about mobile users and actually make your page fast. Thank you.
So we have time for questions, and the first question comes from Alex on Twitter. The slide where speed is not a number, there was a really high bounce rate at the beginning of the chart. Why is it so?
Yeah, give me a second. We are talking about this one, I think. Good. Basically, what that bounce rate reflects is users who bounce before your tracking script loads. So you can't actually track them entering, exiting the page. You can correlate later on the request against the server, but the tracking script didn't load. So basically, that first second is people who leave your page before your tracking script's initialized.
Okay, and the second question is a bit of a troll question, I think. As you can see, real.digital, it looks really similar to Sports Direct logo. Is there any connection?
I think not. We are just really happy about using primary colors, I guess.
Yeah, we still have time for questions. Anyone in the room?
Question about the image size. So you need to define it. What about, like, you can't do with 100% and height auto or something like that? You need to specify it in pixels always. So how do you make it react to the, like, when the user rotates the device to landscape or portrait mode?
You can work with a source set attribute, for instance, to prepare multiple versions of the image depending on the available viewport size. But each of them has to be statically sized. So you have options. It's not like you would always just display a 480p if you're on a large screen. But you need to basically give every fallback image or every image you're going to use on a website the static size. Otherwise, you could not work with the DOM layout in the way we need to work to make it fast.
Any more questions?
The biggest question I actually have about AMP in e-commerce is that it feels to me that nobody is using it. Amazon is not using it, and I'm from a very small company who sells different bathroom furniture, toilets and stuff, and our competitors are not using it. Biggest websites like build.com, Wayfair, nobody's using AMP. They are struggling with their speed and trying to make their best to optimize it in different ways, but not with AMP. So the biggest question for us in terms of optimization is, should we care about AMP at all? If nobody from our field does it.
Again, I'm going to go with the safe answer and say it depends. Basically, it's a matter of approach. You're correct, in e-commerce, AMP is nowhere near as prevalent as in newspapers. Zalando uses it, for instance, and a couple of other shops. We are trying to get into it as well. You can see it on Airbnb, for instance, even though that's not strictly e-commerce anymore, but still a buying experience of sorts, I guess. The reason why you don't see it in a lot of either really large or really small shops is because of the implementation risk. You're never going to convince someone in a big corporation to say, okay, I'm going to take 10 people from the development team, and then we are going to work for half a year, and afterwards it's going to look exactly the same. So the same trouble you have with refactoring anything, really. So what most of them do is just slap an AMP page somewhere, like a second version of the start page, and see how that works. But usually it's so shoddily built or not feature on pair with the features that you are comparing something vastly different and maybe it performs equally. So the reduction of features is offset by the vast increase in performance, but you are still having a smaller subset of features to interact with. So usually if you do these tests, what you will see is the page is really, really fast, obviously, but the user doesn't interact with it as much. But the reason because he doesn't interact with it is because there's not much to interact with to start with. That's one of the reasons why, especially if you are in an agency business and you are trying to sell your customer something, you are usually going with what you know and you are playing it safe. And with AMP, you are basically taking a risk and say, okay, I want to do something, let's try to do it in AMP. I'm guessing you are familiar with BMW, the car maker. BMW, the cars? Maybe you've seen them somewhere. They actually did their entire website in AMP. So if you go to bmw.com on your mobile phone, time it if you wish, it's below 1 second. So you will find even large players in the industry willing to take that risk. And to get back to your question, should we do it if nobody does it in our field of business? Especially then, because you're getting an advantage. And that advantage is going to be measured not in we shaved half a second of load time off, but we are twice as fast as our competitors. And that's a compelling argument to make for your customers. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, one question. If I have an SPA, how can I use AMP? Is there any way, hack around?
There is. You would have to server-side render your content. For instance, Airbnb does it using tools of theirs that have open sourced as well called Hypernova, but basically any server-side rendering will do. Once you've done that, you need to hydrate your server-side rendering output, which is going to be an HTML string, and basically hydrate that with the AMP components. So you're going to go over it and replace every image tag with AMP image and so on. So it works really well. You can head to Airbnb, for instance. They are doing it extensively. But you will not have to get rid of client-side rendering because that does not work with AMP. So if you're server-side rendering your single-page application, you're good to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.